So I was invited here as a moderator. I need to finish my job. Michelle, thank you for the floor.
No free lunch.
No free lunch and no free teas. So we had a very wonderful discussion in our group that was looking at training and education. And the grant name that we're targeting is chronic non-communicable diseases and disorders across the lifespan. It's a Fogarty International Research Training Award, or D43. And we talked about a couple of things, about, generated specific aims, looked at the methodologies and the challenges or obstacles we might face in trying to implement this grant. I'm now going to introduce Laurie, who is going to give you the details of all that we discussed in the 2 hours or so that we had for this. And we hope at the end of it all, you'll be able to give us contributions that can make this better so that we can actually get it running. Laurie.
Sorry, I took my notes on my computer, so I'm going to stand up here and hold my computer. I was told when I sat down in the group that I would be the spokesperson. I was not given a choice, so I hope everybody's okay with this.
There's no free lunch.
No. So the D43, to set the scene a little bit, is a training grant, so anyone who's familiar with the T32, it's a similar architecture, except that the fellows are now fellows from LMICs. So it's structured in a slightly different way than a typical research grant. It's to fund fellowships and it's to fund fellow training. So in terms of specific aims, it's not the science base, it's how we're going to structure it. So I'm going to start and say that the overall theme that we came up with as a group, we actually went through a bunch of possible topics in terms of the research side. It's supposed to be broad. And I could read, and I will in a moment, the list of all the different research topics, but the overall theme that came out of it was child and adolescent. So child and adolescent health and training fellows in a research area involved with child and adolescent health, with some examples being depression, adverse childhood experiences, substance abuse, PTSD, and child and adolescent neurodevelopment. I threw a bit in for genetics and epigenetics, bioethics, and then we also talked quite a bit about keeping the theme also in the arena of implementation sciences, partially because that was very well emphasized in the FOA, or the PAR, whichever one it was, I can't remember. So in terms of specific aims, we built off of a set of specific aims that were produced for a different attempt for a D43 that did we decided not to submit previously, and it's the first aim is focusing on training X amount of fellows in a 3-year fellowship. So the first aim is all about training the fellows. It's a 3-year fellowship. It will involve a terminal degree such as a PhD at the end. The second aim is building the institutional capacity with the focus being on a train the trainers model and making sure that we include within that training for research, grant administration, etc., because that's another thing that comes out of the FOA. The third one is to evaluate our program. So that's the specific aims. Please tell me what the next thing I was supposed to talk about. Methodology. That kind of feeds into what our specific aims were. We did spend a lot of time talking about the research component. So the way these are written really is mentor-based in that you need to prove to the NIH that you have a wonderful pool of successful mentors who have successfully mentored other researchers. So the idea being that we will have a group of mentors on the US side, a group of mentors on the LMIC side. They have similar but also complementary skill sets. We'll have a very large list of mentors because that is what we would need. And the fellows would then be able to work with a US mentor and an LMIC mentor over the course of their 3-year fellowship. the little intricate details on how this would be is something that still requires a lot of conversation and would not be able to be done in 2 hours, but we did talk about a few different strategies on how to model that. The D43, you have to separate things like long-term training, which is that 3-year, from short-term training from something called medium-term training as well. We also spoke about the benefit and whether or not to have a component where the LMIC researchers comes to the US and sits in a US lab for a month or 3 months, and if that's a benefit or not, and that's definitely on the table. So that's our methodology, and also to make sure we build off of things that are already existing. We want to be able to walk in the door with the NIH and say these research collaborations already exist, and this would be to train fellowships to help support the already funded research collaborations. And just within our table alone, there were plenty of those that are already established that we can build off of. If we expand it to the other groups around the room, I think that there will be plenty of ways to argue, depending on which institution we work with, that we have established research collaborations that fellows can walk into, do a research project, and get mentored by multiple people. One stipulation of the D43 on your first submission. Your first submission can have the main site be a U.S. institution with a subcontract to an LMIC institution. However, it can only have one LMIC institution, is the stipulation that on first cycle, it has to be one US to one LMIC. However, there is a slight workaround, which is it's one subcontract to one LMIC, but then that LMIC can invite students and fellows from other institutions in other countries as well. But it would have to be focused right now on a connection between one US institution and one LMIC. The second, it's a 5-year grant, and if we were blessed to get it, the second cycle has to come out of the LMIC. So the first cycle can come where the main institution is the US institution, and then if we were to apply for renewal in 5 years, it would have to be an LMIC institution. So those are the methodologies, and then I think the next thing was hurdles?
Yeah.
Okay. We have a list of those. So number 1 on the list, like T32s, there is zero support for faculty time. The money is all for the fellows. The first year is $230,000. Every additional year is up to $250,000. It can go to many things. It goes to tuition, it can go to stipend, it goes to travel, it goes to supplies like a laptop or textbooks, etc., paying for training courses. It's very generous in what it will pay for our fellows, but it will not pay for FTE for faculty. There is a small amount of money that can be used for administrative support. And that is a big hurdle because obviously they pay for this thing to work, but not for the people to actually put it on. So that's a hurdle, and it would require the institutions it would require the people that push this forward to have either institutional support or be able to be at that point in their career where they can do this and not be dependent on filling their own percentages and their own time. That's a big hurdle. There is a small amount of money that can be used for seed grants, possibly within this because we weren't sure if that was a hurdle. Another one is, as we talked about who these fellows would be, we spent a lot of time discussing this and sort of rallied around the idea of they would be MDs that have a research master's who then are in a PhD program. We thought about it in terms of where do we want them in 3 years. And in 3 years, we want them to be able to submit an independent grant and write papers, right? So we kind of decided that's where we want them to be in 3 years, and we backtracked from there. So the question is especially if they're clinicians, although it wouldn't be limited to just clinicians, how do they get permission for the time to participate in this fellowship? How do they get paid? How is a clinician going to be able to excuse themselves from all those clinical duties for 3 years? How do you find that sort of thing? So that's a hurdle that we were thinking about. And then lastly, who would write it? That's a big hurdle. It's a big grant, and anyone who's been, I don't know, has anybody here been involved in a T32? So it's that, but in another country that you're not physically in at that point. So you're literally doing this now for multiple places. So it's a big grant. It's going to require a lot of administrative support. It's 25 pages. It's a lot of added appendices, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not an insurmountable hurdle. It's just a hurdle that needs to be decided.